my guest is Nitin Gokhale, media entrepreneur, strategic affairs expert, and an author of more than half a dozen books on military history, emergency, insurgencies, and wars. And he's also one of South Asia's leading strategic analysts. Welcome to the show, Nitin.
Thank you, Arnav.
Nitin, we'll start with the negative list of imports that the defense minister has announced. The government has just announced a negative list of 101 items of defense equipment that will not be imported anymore. Your comments on this, please.
Well, this is in continuation of the defense reforms that were announced 4 months ago, where Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had laid down some far-reaching reforms that time. So this is the next step in that set of reforms. So that time they had said that Atmanirbharta in defense, self-reliance in defense will be taken forward and will be stressed upon as going forward. Now, in that, they had talked about several things like having a separate capital budget, capital procurement budget for sourcing defense equipment from Indian manufacturers, be it public sector or private sector. They had also spoken about 74% FDI limit raised for foreign investors. They had talked about giving preference or implementing the old defense procurement procedure of 2016 fully, where for the first time, actually, I would say this is a continuation of defense reforms that were unleashed in 2016-17, when late Manohar Parrikar was a defense minister, where for the first time they had created a category called IDDM, indigenously designed, developed and manufactured defense platforms. So this is in continuation of that. So that was done in 2016, 2018 they had announced, 2017 they had announced something called strategic partnership, where major defense platforms like helicopters, submarines, artillery guns would be manufactured in India as a joint venture between an original equipment manufacturer based out of India with an Indian defense company, be it a DPSU, Defense Public Sector Undertaking, or a private Indian defense industry. So my first reaction to this list is that now the Indian Armed Forces will have to perforce buy whatever equipment is manufactured, designed and developed by Indian companies, which gives a leg up to the Indian defense companies, both defense public sector units as well as private sector. Keeps the money within India, so you don't have to spend foreign exchange, precious foreign exchange. And three, it generates jobs. So I think all in all, a very important reform in the roadmap for defense reforms.
You know, the government soon after coming to power announced defense reforms and allowed 49% of FDI in defense companies. Now it's raised that to 74%. Despite that, not much private sector or foreign investment has come in the defense sector. And all previous attempts at creating a viable defense industrial base in India have failed. So how is this attempt different?
Well, it is different because, as you rightly pointed out, 49% was not enough for foreign companies or original equipment manufacturers to come and set up anything here in India, because they needed to have control of management and also decision making. So therefore, that did not succeed. 74% is a big, bold step, because this will allow full management control to OEMs. And yet, there is this provision that they have to set up or establish a unit in India. So that is the difference from the earlier limit for FDI, one. Second, the decision to have a separate procurement budget for Indian ventures or joint ventures means that a chunk of money has now been reserved for an Indian entity, be it a joint venture or a purely Indian entity, which means the defense contractors, defense manufacturers, big leading defense manufacturers in the world will also eye this pie in a way, the part of the cake, because chunk of money has gone into that budget. That is different from earlier times. Earlier times there was no categorization. I mean, you could procure. I mean, the capital budget was same for every category of procurement that you had to do. That has made a difference. Will make a difference. And third is the government has clarified 2 days after coming out with the list on Sunday, the 101 negative items list, that while they have listed the names of some of the Indian platforms like Pinaka and some missiles and all that, that doesn't mean that other similar platforms in the same category can be imported if need be. Now, even that is barred. Imports are barred in that category completely, which means, as I mentioned, the money will stay here. And therefore, it is a big difference from the earlier policies. Earlier policies did not stipulate this. The final point I want to make in this part of your question is that the indigenous content in any platform has been stipulated, has been now laid down to at least minimum 50%, which means it will benefit the Indian MSMEs and smaller supply chain partners who will supply it to the bigger companies. And a lot of people have created or have raised doubts about whether Indian companies are capable. But in my experience of dealing with them for the last so many years, in fact 3 decades now, I can tell you that the talent exists, the products are there, but because they had no reservation to begin with, which has been provided in a way in this policy, I think they will get the boost they require there, and I think therefore it is a different policy than the earlier policies.
To continue on with this question, the private sector often complains that they are being muscled out by the Ordnance Factory Board and by the public sector. How can the government deal with this? Because defense, there has to be some amount of opacity to maintain secrecy. And we're talking of huge amounts, thousands and thousands of crores per deal. So obviously there will be um, allegations of kickbacks, allegations of corruption, especially by losing contenders. So how does one deal with this?
That's true. That has been the bane of the Indian defense sector. You're rightly pointing that out. But here also there is a catch now. Unlike the earlier times, the OFB or the Ordnance Factory Board or the Defense Public Sector units will not get a nominated contract because they always have had that advantage that they was to be nominated by the government for manufacturing defense platforms. In this particular policy, which came out in 2016 and now has been revised and is now about to be revised again. Now it's being called Defense Acquisition Policy, which should come out next month after consultations. It will have a level playing field for the private sector. The DPSUs and OFB will have to compete. So the strategic partnership model that I mentioned actually forces the DPSU. Let's take an example of submarine building, for instance, which is supposed to be the first tender that is going to come out under the strategic partnership model in maybe September sometime or end of this month in August, where and two OEMs or three OEMs, it could be a French company, could be a German company, could be a Russian company. They will have to tie up with a Indian partner. Now, an Indian partner could be Mazgaon Docks Limited or it could be L&T, who have the strength in submarine building. And that old advantage of being nominated or selected by the government is no longer there. Now, MDL will have to compete with the OEM partner, whoever chooses them, bid for the tender, and then come out with a competitive price, commercials. Only then they will get that contract. It is no guarantee that they will get that contract. Now, this is something which I think will give solace to private sector in the Indian private sector, that now there is a level playing field. In fact, there is the other demand which I don't know whether they will comply with or have agreed to, is that the OFB and the DPSUs have the advantage of cost plus model because their cost is paid by the government, and then whatever they quote over and above that is their profit. But that is also set to go because the government is now determined to corporatize OFB. and make it not part of a government department but a separate corporate entity where they will not have any lifeline of money from the government. So all these are very small but very significant changes and reforms that have been brought.
What exactly ails India's defense acquisitions? I mean, why does it take forever to take a decision? Look at the way the Rafale deal sort of meandered, and then got cut down to 36 Rafales, and now there's talk of 36 more. What are the reforms needed really to bring it to make it fit for the 21st century?
Well, first thing that is needed is that the timelines have to be laid down. Earlier, there used to be no timelines. I can tell you from experience again that once the acceptance of necessity was granted by the Defense Acquisition Council, that means when the Defense Acquisition Council agreed to a proposal from an armed forces, from one of the services, that they need to buy, let's say, an X item, it used to take from the AON, acceptance of necessity, to signing a contract. Forget delivering the product, but signing a contract, it used to take minimum of 3 years. But again, in the current scenario, in the new policy, timelines are being laid, where they're saying that from AON to tender being floated, there should be something like 6 months to 18 months kind of a period. Otherwise the project management team will be held responsible, and then also then deliveries will have to be done. So basically what is happening is, in one sentence, is accountability is being brought in. Earlier nobody was being held responsible for delays. You could keep on doing trials, you could keep on saying that these criteria are not being met. And mind you, this is not just the civilian bureaucracy, it is also the bureaucracy in uniform which used to be significantly contributing to this delay, which is now being sought to be cut down by these measures which I mentioned. That there will be laid down timelines, there will be people held accountable for delays, and there will be finally some kind of an audit done on what has been done from AON to delivering the product. So I think there is some hope there.
Um, you know, s- Nowadays one keeps hearing the word strategic autonomy. It's replaced non-alignment as the new buzzword in foreign policy circles. How are the two different? And do you think that India's policy of carefully balancing its strategic ties with the US so as not to upset China will now undergo a change following the recent escalation of the military dispute and the border dispute with China?
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, non-alignment was about not taking any sides. Strategic autonomy is about choosing your side when it suits you, and maybe choosing it simultaneously. So I think there is a difference. In non-alignment, you just studiously kept out of the Cold War or the great power rivalry that time between the US and the USSR, and you sort of hope that you will not be sucked into that. Today, even if you are sucked in, you will still do horses for courses policy. And I think it's very clear the way it has been done. In a way, look at how India or the Indian Prime Minister goes to Palestine to visit that place, and at the same time has good relations with Israel, and also goes to visit Israel. While in the earlier days, no Indian Prime Minister dared to go to Israel because there was this apprehension that the vote bank back home and our sensitivities back home will be affected. So I think it is right now, the change is that we choose our, I would say, not alliances, but partnerships according to own national interest and not what the world would think or what people would think. I think that is the essential difference. And I think even in this, although we are now, I would say, boosting Quad, for instance, with US, Japan, Australia, and India coming together in the Indo-Pacific. Also, we have done two foundational agreements with United States after 15, 16 years of hesitation, where we thought our and that time also the strategic autonomy was being talked about, that India's decision-making autonomy would be affected if you sign those agreements. But India's gone ahead and signed those agreements. One more is likely to be signed very soon. But it still doesn't mean, in my view, that India will be dictated by what the US says about China. India is being very careful about China and how it sort of makes its statements or intent clear. I'll give you an example. India has told its interlocutors in the United States time and again that remember, while you may want us to be the part of the containment alliance or partnerships that you're building in Indo-Pacific, we are the country which has the longest contested border with China, not you. You are a distant power and sitting far away. So therefore, let us deal with China on our own terms bilaterally because we have the problem, not you, and you will not come to our rescue when the problems arise. And in this particular case, the standoff in Ladakh, India is dealing with the standoff in Ladakh on its own. I mean, there is no support, visible support, except for some intelligence inputs from the US, and of course, President Trump making some statements here and there. I think India is dealing with the Chinese challenge on its own, and I think that's the way it should be.
China has been following what many people, such as yourself, call the string of pearls strategy of encircling India bit by bit, and encroaching upon what was once considered to be India's backyard: Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bangladesh, even Myanmar. What can India do to change and counter this strategic encirclement?
Okay, I have this maybe slightly different view. I don't know if others have this view. I think gone are the days of a secure backyard for any country. And let me explain. I mean, today the United States cannot have a guarantee of the South American continent or the neighborhood being completely in support of the United States, for instance, or it is being challenged in what used to be its backyard or a kind of a distant place in Southeast Asia. They had the protective umbrella around the Southeast Asian or the ASEAN nations. It's no longer true because China is challenging them there. You look at Australia's periphery. The Pacific Island nations used to be in Australia's sphere of influence. They're no longer true. They're also facing the same thing. So I think India is no exception. There are no backyards. And remember, although China might think that there are no string of pearls around China, let's not forget that even other countries are now coming together. I'm not using the word ganging up, but coming together against China in Southeast Asia. There is Mongolia on top of China or on north of China. There is South Korea. There is Taiwan, of course, the issue, Japan. So it's string of pearls for almost every nation. Now, how does India counter this thing? I think, in my view, in the strategic competition that exists in South Asia, there is no permanent win or a permanent loss. Let's take the example of what happened in Maldives. In 2018, January, I remember, obituary of Indian presence was being written in Maldives. That India is completely out of Maldives. China has completely taken over Maldives. They're now, it's their province and that kind of thing. Within a year or year and a half, the tables turned, and today India is the flavor of the season in Maldives. And just today, as we speak, India has announced some emergency aid to Maldives to tide over its financial crisis right now. So I think it's, and that's just one example. Even Sri Lanka, the Rajapaksa brothers, who are so beholden were beholden to China during the Elam War 4 and subsequently, have mended fences with India because they know geography cannot be changed. You might change your friends, but geography cannot be changed. So I don't think India is completely out of the game. It is a contest we have to be aware of, fight it out, and continue to do this. I mean, who knows what happens in Nepal in maybe a couple of months' time? We don't know. I mean, I don't have any secrets to share or spill here, but my sense is things will change in Nepal very soon.
Thank you very much for your time and for your thoughts, Nitin. Thank you very much.